Premier League rivals are circling for Newcastle United's main defensive targets. In this video, we're going to discuss that, where Newcastle United go next, and I'll profile one potential option. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks to everybody who's continued to support, like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't already, please do so, because I'm really hoping to get to 1,500 subscribers very quickly. Although this is Friday and the final episode of the week, I am going to be doing a bonus Q&A on Sunday. I've got a bit of time, so if you've got any questions on Newcastle's transfer scenario or anything at all, I guess, put them down in the comment section. Keep them clean, please. Or if you're watching having come from X or Blue Sky, then reply and I will add them to the list. But today we're going to be discussing two emerging stories from yesterday which concern other Premier League clubs chasing two Newcastle United defensive targets. The biggest story, I think, is Marc Guehi and Liverpool circling. They're apparently preparing to make a bid for the England defender. He's the most heavily linked with Newcastle over the last 12 months. I think obviously they made such a play for him last summer, failed in that approach to get him from Crystal Palace. He's on the list as a top target this summer, but now Liverpool look like they're going to possibly trump Newcastle. Obviously, we discussed Liverpool and their move for Alexander Isak yesterday and what that could mean. They're really planning on bolting the horse in terms of their squad this summer. They didn't really do that a year ago. Now they're doing that, and it looks like this could be a potential replacement for Ibrahim Konate, who has got a year left on his contract. Guehi would probably come in this summer as another option at the back. He's down on the price. Obviously, Crystal Palace know they have to sell him this summer because of the contract situation with no plans for a renewal. He's been captain there. He's won them an FA Cup. It kind of feels like I think he's ready for that next step up. He's been linked with Tottenham and Chelsea since Newcastle bid for him as well. So this is sort of fast becoming the best example of what I've been speaking about targeting Premier League players, which other Premier League clubs want, drives the price up, makes it a difficult deal to do. And Liverpool, I think, are probably the worst team Newcastle could come up against in this certain situation, because they need a centre-back as well. They need a very similar type of centre-back, and Marc Guehi's been on their list for quite a while too. So it would make sense if he went to Liverpool. Newcastle, whether Newcastle react to this, I don't know. But it feels like if Liverpool are ready to bid, then they've got into a position where they're, I think Marc Guehi's made it clear that he's open to a move to a lot of these Premier League clubs. Newcastle were certainly very encouraged last summer, so I think he would definitely be keen on a move to Liverpool. So it might be difficult for Newcastle to react to this now. Let's see what they do, but they don't tend to like getting into bidding wars. And again, it's strange that they don't want to get into bidding wars and they don't want high prices, and yet they constantly have these domestic targets at the top of their list. I think there is no way of really covering this up. He has been their top defensive target for the last 12 months at the very least. It would be a blow if Newcastle have conceded in the race to Liverpool. I think it would add to fan frustration which is developing because reporters, and I've written about this for BBC Sport and other reporters have written the same thing, the information out there is out there very deliberately. It's all the same information. Very few people are getting anything new, and there's very little to go on. So perhaps this isn't too much of an issue. Perhaps Newcastle have other things on their radar and they are going to move, and things are ramping up. We know it's going to ramp up by the time that July turns around. They're currently focused mostly on the João Pedro deal. They've held talks with James Trafford as well, but they do need to react into these centre-back situations. And if Marc Guehi is their main target and this happened, then they do have to find a different alternative. That we know that they've also scouted Ousmane Diomande, and he would be an ideal alternative. I've spoken about that plenty of times on this channel. I did my alternatives video to Guehi last year, and he was very much on that list. But the difficult thing is Crystal Palace, who are looking to replace Marc Guehi, have held talks with Ousmane Diomande. This is not quite as damaging, I think, in terms of a Newcastle perspective, because they have more financial power, more incentive perhaps in terms of European football and Champions League action, and a hope to push towards the top of the end of the table. Maybe that could swing Diomande if it came to that, and I think that Newcastle could quite easily go head to head with Palace and win that race. I think it's much more difficult with Guehi if Liverpool are there, Tottenham and Chelsea as well. With so you've got London options and you've got the Premier League champions, especially especially with all three of those clubs also having Champions League football. Yes, London is possibly a thing in the Diomande thing for Crystal Palace. There's doubts over whether they'll play in Europe next season, even though they're qualified for the FA Cup. And Newcastle have Champions League football and a real and probably an ability to pay a little bit higher in terms of wages as well. So if Newcastle were to go in for Diomande, I'm pretty confident that they could usurp Palace in those negotiations. However, the fact that Crystal Palace have already laid the foundations a little bit means that they're ahead. And what we were discussing with João Pedro and Chelsea, this is why I was saying don't worry about that too much, because Newcastle have got the pole position at this current stage. That's kind of the opposite with Diomande. Now Palace have made their move, Newcastle have to react if they're going to. Similarly to Guehi, even though I think it is a little bit better as a scenario. But yeah, let me know in the comment section below what you think on the apparent double blow that Crystal Palace are moving ahead for Ousmane Diomande, and particularly Liverpool going for Marc Guehi, and what you think should happen next. I am going to move on to a player that we have discussed on the channel before. When I first started this channel a couple of years ago, I mentioned him as a player that Newcastle liked. They then held talks to him after bids for Guehi failed last summer, and that is Edmond Tapsoba from Bayer Leverkusen, a German Bundesliga winner, a very, very accomplished defender, very powerful defender, quick, tall, very good on the ball as well, very good in terms of progressive passes attempted, 88th percentile, 96th percentile for progressive carries, 93rd percentile for progressive passes, 83rd percentile for take-ons, shot creating actions, 91. What those stats tell you is he's very good at getting involved in the play. He's also very quick. He's got good recovery pace. You can see at the bottom there his defensive actions aren't particularly strong. Interceptions, tackles, blocks. Aerial duels 1 is quite low, and maybe that is a concern considering he's 6'3". But I want to bring your attention to William Saliba, who's got very similar sort of strengths and weaknesses, and you can see the defensive actions aren't particularly strong, and he is seen as one of the best defensive players in the Premier League. And the reason why I think that this is not a concern is because Bayer Leverkusen and Arsenal are both teams with the 4th highest possession stats in their respective leagues last season, over 50%. So they dominate the ball. So it's very, very rare that you need to make those defensive actions. That's exactly what Newcastle are aiming for. They're aiming to dominate the ball and suffocate teams. It'll be slightly different for Tapsoba to play in a back 4 over a back 3, which he has been doing at Leverkusen, but Newcastle like him. They spoke to Leverkusen last summer. It didn't go anywhere. It might be a difficult deal to do this year because obviously they've sold Jeremy Frimpong, they're selling Florian Wirtz as well to Liverpool. But Bayer Leverkusen's project is at a real crossroads. That era that's put them on the map in the last couple of years is over. Xabi Alonso's left, and Edmond Tapsoba may look at this and think there's an opportunity to go and play in the Premier League here. So we'll see how this plays out. As I say, there are no current suggestions that Newcastle are interested, but we do know that their long-standing interest is there. They've liked him for 2 years. They actually made a play for him last year. My only concern about his game is the fact that he's so tall and he's not particularly strong in the air by the looks of those stats, and having watched him a few times. But the ability on the ball and his pace just means that he's perfect. He's both-footed as well. He's an excellent defender overall. A release clause of 95 million euros, incredibly, which I don't think Newcastle are going to get anywhere near. I don't think they would have to get anywhere near. I wonder if this deal is sort of in that ballpark of between 35 and 50 million sort of area that Newcastle will face if they go and try and buy either Diomande or Marc Guehi. So that's one suggestion that I have. There are other names that Newcastle are interested in as well. There's Nathan Collins from Brentford, who's been linked. He'd be a very, very interesting defender, 24-year-old Irishman. But again, the domestic situation is a bit of an issue there. There are plenty of names in Europe as well. And there's need for calm, there's need for patience, but I do understand you watching this have probably heard me say this last year, and that I thought it was going to happen, and I think I did say that it was likely to happen. So I understand a little bit more why fans are more nervous, especially with the boardroom situation going on, as I mentioned yesterday. The narrative that has been formed that Guehi and Diomande are the two main targets may be true, but it doesn't mean that they're the only players, and it doesn't mean that Newcastle don't have other options. As I say, they made a play for Tapsoba. They had initial talks with Bayer Leverkusen. It didn't go very far. Maybe they'll look at that again. And I think that the chances of them signing him are definitely stronger this year than they were last year, obviously coming off the back of that incredible season, winning the Bundesliga, getting to the Europa League final, winning the German Cup as well, losing no games domestically, getting into the Champions League when Newcastle had no European football. There was very little reason for Tapsoba to leave at that point, whereas now there's a bit of a crossroads in Leverkusen. Newcastle have Champions League football, and they can really sell that project in and see what happens, because he's very, very highly rated. He's been linked with a number of Premier League clubs in the past. Don't worry about those defensive actions. They do look low on those stats, but as I showed you with William Saliba, it's because of the style of play, it's because of the possession that's not necessarily required. And to further that, you look at the fact that take-ons, the carries, the passes are so strong for Tapsoba. He would really fit next to Sven Botman quite nicely, I think. But that's just one option. As I say, there are plenty of others. We'll talk about them a lot going into next week and when I return for the daily shows. But I'll be back on Sunday, hopefully, if there's more questions coming. I've already had a couple. So please do get your questions in. If you want a bonus episode and a bonus Q&A, I'll happily sit down and record that on Sunday. But in the meantime, thanks so much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Sunday, hopefully.